Welcome to Silent Queen's Calling. Let's get into the story. A real estate developer pulled up to a crumbling Mississippi farmhouse in a brand new Range Rover, his 25-year-old girlfriend hanging off his arm like a trophy he'd just won. He had one goal: to get his ex-wife to sign a single piece of paper releasing her claim to a piece of land he'd always dismissed as worthless swamp. He brought a bottle of cheap wine as a joke gift. He brought Tiffany to twist the knife, and he was so blinded by his own contempt that he never once asked himself why a woman he'd spent 8 years calling too simple to survive on her own had turned down 3 separate cash settlement offers over the past 14 months without a single counteroffer. He was about to find out. Chapter 1. The Man with the Map. When 44-year-old real estate developer Dominic Hale turned his pearl-white Range Rover Sport off the county road and onto the long, rutted gravel driveway that cut through the overgrown property in Sunflower County, Mississippi, he was in an almost theatrical good mood. He drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel. He had the kind of confidence that only comes from having never been truly wrong about anything, or so he believed. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Hale Development Group, a Memphis-based commercial real estate firm that had spent the last decade paving over cotton fields and turning them into distribution centers for logistics companies hungry for cheap land and highway access. His company had made him rich in the blunt, unglamorous way that industrial real estate makes men rich: volume, leverage, and a willingness to squeeze every margin until it bled. Sitting in the passenger seat, scrolling through her Instagram with 2-inch acrylic nails that clicked softly against her phone screen, was Tiffany. Tiffany was 25. She was training to be a lifestyle content creator, which in practical terms meant she photographed her meals, documented her skincare routine, and spent Dominic's money with the focused efficiency of a woman who understood exactly what her role in the arrangement was. "Babe," Tiffany said, not looking up from her phone, "are you sure this is even a real address? My GPS said this road isn't on the map." "That's because it's barely a road," Dominic said, peering through the windshield at the narrow gravel path disappearing into a tunnel of old-growth pecan trees. "Vivian's been out here for 3 years, living like a hermit on 40 acres of drainage ditch in kudzu." He smiled at the windshield. "She's going to be thrilled to see us." He said it the way a man says something that means the exact opposite. Vivian Hale. She had kept his last name, which had always quietly irritated him, had been his wife for 8 years. They had met when Dominic was still running his first small development company out of a strip mall office in Germantown. Vivian was 32 then, working as a soil and environmental consultant for a civil engineering firm. A quiet, precise woman with a southern accent she'd mostly ironed out, and a habit of reading academic journals the way other people read magazines. She was not what anyone would call flashy. She wore her dark hair pulled back. She preferred boots and field pants to heels. She had opinions about drainage gradients and groundwater tables that she could defend with the patience of someone who had spent years explaining complicated things to people who didn't want to listen. Dominic had married her because she was smart and steady, and because, in those early years, he had genuinely valued those qualities in a partner. Then the company started growing. Then the money started arriving in serious quantities. Then Dominic started attending the kind of dinners and charity galas where a woman who wanted to talk about soil remediation and wetland mitigation was a liability rather than an asset. The divorce had come 3 years ago, moving fast and mean. Dominic's attorneys had outmaneuvered Vivian's single small firm lawyer in the initial asset division, awarding him the lion's share of the company equity and the Memphis properties. Vivian, in the final negotiated settlement, had received a modest monthly payment and the deed to 40 acres of undeveloped farmland in Sunflower County, land that had been in Dominic's portfolio for years, land that his own land assessor had valued at just under $400,000 and described in the official report as agriculturally marginal with significant water management challenges. In short, Dominic had considered the land worthless. He had given it to Vivian the way you'd give someone a gift card to a store you know they can't get to. He had expected her to sell it within a year, take the modest sum, and move on. She had not sold it. For 14 months, Dominic's attorney had sent 3 separate purchase offers to Vivian's address, increasingly generous offers, each one reflecting the growing urgency on Dominic's side. The first offer she had ignored entirely. The second she had declined in 4 words via email. "Not interested at this time." The third offer she had declined with a single line, Please direct all future communications to my attorney, Renata Osei, ESEC, of the law firm Osei and Carver, Nashville. Renata Osei, ESEC, of the law firm Osei and Carver, Nashville. Renata Osei. The name had made Dominic's own attorney go slightly quiet on the phone for a moment. Dominic had done what men like him always do when a strategy stops working. He decided to handle it personally. The Range Rover crested a slight rise in the gravel path, and the farmhouse came into view. Dominic's smirk held steady. The house looked exactly as he'd expected, as he'd hoped, if he was being honest. A weathered, two-story structure with a wide front porch, white paint going gray in patches, a tin roof showing orange rust at the seams. The kind of house that looked tired, the kind of house that said give up in the language of peeling wood and sagging gutters. "Oh my God," Tiffany murmured, finally looking up from her phone. She took in the house, the flat green fields rolling away from it in every direction. The silence. "She lives here? On purpose?" "She does," Dominic said, putting the Range Rover in park and reaching into the back seat for a slim manila folder. Inside the folder was a document his attorneys had spent 2 weeks preparing. A quitclaim deed. A simple, clean transfer of the 40-acre property back to Hale Development Group. And tucked behind it, a certified bank check made out to Vivian Hale for $200,000, well above the land's assessed value. In Dominic's estimation, a more than generous final offer. He also reached back and grabbed the bottle of rosé he'd brought. A $10 bottle he'd picked up at a gas station outside Clarksdale. The kind of detail that was meant to communicate something without having to say it out loud. He got out of the car. He straightened his jacket. A slim-cut charcoal blazer he wore with dark jeans and Italian driving loafers. The universal costume of the southern businessman who wants to seem casual but not poor. Tiffany climbed out after him, her wedge sandals immediately sinking slightly into the soft ground, and she grabbed his arm for balance. "Don't touch the porch railing," Dominic advised as they climbed the front steps. "Looks like it might not hold." He knocked. For a long moment, there was only the sound of a distant tractor somewhere beyond the fields and the rhythmic percussion of late summer insects. Tiffany shifted her weight. Then the front door opened. Vivian stood in the doorway. She was 41 years old, and she looked. Dominic's brain stalled on this for half a second. She looked well. Not the kind of well that requires visible effort. The quiet kind. She was wearing a worn chambray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark canvas trousers, and the same pair of steel-toed boots she'd owned since before they got married. Her dark hair was down, longer than he remembered, with a few threads of silver at the temples that she had apparently decided to simply keep. She looked at him. Her expression was not surprised. It was not hostile. It was the expression of someone who had already calculated the most likely outcomes of this visit and had simply been waiting for the relevant variable to arrive. Her eyes moved briefly to Tiffany. She took in the wedge sandals, slowly sinking into the soft soil, the platform-thick mascara, the acrylic nails. Her expression didn't change. It might have slightly deepened. "Dominic," Vivian said. Her voice was even and unhurried. "You could have called." "I was in the area," Dominic said, which was not true. "Sunflower County was 3 hours from Memphis. Thought we'd stop by." He held up the rosé. "Brought something." Vivian looked at the gas station rosé. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Come in," she said, and stepped back from the door. Chapter 2. What 40 Acres Can Tame. Dominic stepped over the threshold and immediately began composing the narrative he would tell later to his business partners, to Tiffany over dinner, to himself. The story about the sad farmhouse, the worn-out woman, the easy signature. He got 2 steps into the entry hall, and the narrative collapsed entirely. The interior of the house had been taken apart and rebuilt from the inside out. The original plaster walls in the entry were intact, but they'd been carefully restored rather than replaced. The original horsehair plaster skimmed to a smooth matte finish the color of old bone. The wide plank pine floors had been stripped and refinished to a warm honey that caught the afternoon light coming through the newly rehung original windows. Every piece of original millwork, the tall baseboards, the door casings with their distinctive late Victorian corner blocks, had been painstakingly repaired. It was the work of someone who understood old buildings, not someone who had renovated, someone who had restored. They followed Vivian deeper into the house, and Dominic's mental accounting began misfiring. The main living space had been opened up. a load-bearing wall removed and replaced with a heavy timber beam salvaged from somewhere. It had the silver-gray patina of something reclaimed, not purchased. The furniture was spare and deliberate. A long, low sofa in cognac leather, a shaker-style cabinet in hand-rubbed cherry that held a carefully arranged collection of geological survey maps in flat frames, a dining table in raw walnut that someone had clearly built by hand. There were no decorative signs. There were no mason jar centerpieces. There was no styling in the way that word gets used now, the performance of taste. There was just the thing itself, a beautiful room, quietly and completely realized. Through the back windows, Dominic could see the rear of the property, and what he saw out there made him stop walking. The fields he had dismissed as drainage ditch and kudzu had been transformed. The nearest section, perhaps 5 or 6 acres visible from the window, was planted in something he couldn't immediately identify from this distance. Organized in precise rows that ran slightly off compass in the way that experienced farmers orient rows to manage water flow. Beyond that, a low earthen berm curved along the property's south boundary, and on the other side of the berm, catching the flat late afternoon sun at a brilliant angle, was what appeared to be, Dominic squinted, a series of large ground-mounted solar panel arrays, row after row of them, angled south, new enough to still carry a faint blue-black sheen. "Sit down," Vivian said from somewhere toward the kitchen. "I'll get water. Or I can make coffee." "Water's fine," Dominic said, sounding less certain than he had in the car. He sat down at the walnut table. Tiffany sat beside him, setting her quilted bag on the table, and then looked at her hand resting on the wood and thought better of it and moved the bag to her lap. She was looking around the room with an expression that wasn't quite the contempt she'd worn on the drive over. Vivian came back with a tray, a pitcher of water with cucumber and mint, 2 glasses. Nothing performative about it, just what you offered people when they arrived on a hot afternoon in the Mississippi Delta. She set the tray down, sat across from them, and waited. Dominic put the manila folder on the table. He placed the gas station rosé beside it and registered, for the first time, what it looked like sitting on that particular table. He left it there anyway. "Vivian," he said, pulling the quitclaim deed from the folder and sliding it across the wood, "I'll be direct. Hale Development Group has a buyer lined up for this property. Industrial tenant needs to break ground before the end of Q1. Good offer on the table." He slid the bank check after the deed. $200,000 certified, available immediately. That's 50% over the assessed value. You can close and have the money in your account by the end of the week. Vivian looked at the check. She looked at it the way you look at something that doesn't require a response. "The assessed value from whose assessment?" she asked. "The county," Dominic said. "The county assessed this property in 2019, Vivian said, using aerial survey data from 2016 and soil sampling coordinates from the 1990s. The county assessor's office has a 4-year backlog on rural reassessment requests, and this property hasn't been physically inspected since before we bought it." A small silence. "Dominic," Vivian said, "what exactly does your buyer want this land for?" Dominic recalibrated slightly. "Distribution center. Same as we've been doing throughout the corridor. Flat land, highway access, low acquisition costs." Vivian picked up her water glass. "And how far into due diligence is this buyer?" "Far enough," Dominic said. "This is a formality at this point." "Far enough," Dominic said. "This is a formality at this point. I just need your signature." Tiffany, who had been quiet long enough, apparently decided it was time to contribute. She leaned forward slightly, bracelets sliding down her wrist with a soft metallic sound, and fixed Vivian with the look she used when she wanted to communicate that she was the more powerful party in a conversation. "He's being generous," Tiffany said. "More than generous. Do you know what this place would sell for in the open market? No offense, but it's basically a field. You've put some work into the house, sure, but the land," she gestured vaguely toward the back windows, "is just land." Vivian turned to look at Tiffany with an expression of mild, genuine interest. The kind of interest a field scientist has when she encounters a new and slightly puzzling specimen. "The solar installation on the south acreage alone," Vivian said conversationally, "is under a 25-year power purchase agreement with the regional co-op, commenced 8 months ago. The annual payment is $63,000. She paused. "The agreement transfers with the land." Tiffany blinked. The bracelets went quiet. Dominic said nothing. He was doing the arithmetic and didn't like what it was producing. And the hemp, Vivian continued, as though they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. The 18 acres in the east section is in its second harvest cycle. I have a contract with a CBD extraction facility in Memphis. She let the city name land gently. Memphis. She let the city name land gently. Your city, Dominic. The extraction facility's parent company is a portfolio company of Meridian Agricultural Ventures. She picked up her water glass again, who I believe is also a minority stakeholder in 2 of your Tennessee corridor properties. The room was very quiet. Outside, the insects continued their indifferent rhythm. Dominic stared at her. He had come here to watch a woman sign a document. He was now sitting in a chair in a house that had been invisible to him, on land he had considered worthless, realizing with a cold, spreading clarity that Vivian had spent 3 years building something specific and deliberate on what he had thrown away. Chapter 3. The deed that didn't move. You can't have known all this when we divorced, Dominic said. His voice had lost its boardroom authority. It was lower now, searching for solid ground. 3 years ago, this was an empty field. 3 years ago, Vivian said, setting down her water glass with a quiet, definitive sound. This was an empty field that I had spent 2 years studying before we ever bought it. She stood up. She walked to the shaker cabinet along the wall, opened the lower section, and returned to the table carrying a thick, cloth-bound document. She set it down in front of him. The cover read, in plain typed letters, Sunflower County Parcel 4471A, Comprehensive Soil, Hydrology, and Solar Irradiance Assessment, V. Hale, M.S., Assessment V. Hale, M.S., CEG 2017. I am a certified environmental geologist, Dominic, Vivian said, sitting back down. I have been one for 16 years. When your acquisitions team brought this property to our attention as a low-value land bank, I looked at the soil composition, the groundwater elevation, the solar angle data, and the proximity to the co-op grid connection 2 miles south. She folded her hands on the table. I knew what this land could become the week we bought it. Dominic looked at the document, then at his ex-wife. His brain was doing something it didn't often do, genuinely revising a model of the world. You didn't say anything, he said. I didn't, Vivian agreed. Why not? Because you were going to give it to me in the divorce, she said simply. Your assessor said it was worth $400,000. Your attorneys insisted you were being generous. I let them believe that. She pulled the quitclaim deed across the table so it was back in front of her. She didn't look at the check. Dominic, this property as it currently stands, with the PPA, the hemp contract, and the pending reclassification I've applied for through the county. She paused. Is worth approximately $3.4 million. Conservatively, the number dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Tiffany said very quietly, wait. Dominic's jaw worked. The reclassification, filed 18 months ago, approved in principle last Tuesday. Vivian reached into the pocket of her chambray shirt and set a single folded letter on the table. The header read, Sunflower County Land Use Authority, Agricultural Special Use Classification, which permits the existing renewable energy installation and crop contract under a protected agricultural status. Meaning, she said, in the tone of someone explaining something they have explained before and will explain with complete patience again. It is substantially more difficult for an industrial developer to petition for a zoning variance on this parcel than it was 3 years ago. Dominic pushed back from the table. He stood up, walked to the back windows, and looked out at the solar panels and the hemp rows and the precise geometry of something he had dismissed as drainage ditch and kudzu. I'll get investors, he said to the window. I have money. I can make you an offer that reflects the actual value. Name a number. The property isn't for sale, Vivian said. He turned around. Everything is for sale. Dominic, she said, and her voice was not unkind, but it was entirely without yield. You gave this land to me because you thought it was worthless. You wanted me to feel it with truth. You wanted me to feel it. You wanted me to take the deed and understand that this was what you thought I was worth. She let that sentence settle. I'm not interested in selling it. I'm interested in keeping it, because every year that I do, it's a precise and very specific answer to what you said, without saying it in that mediation room. Chapter 4. When the buyer calls. Dominic pulled out his phone. Tiffany recognized the move. He was calling his attorney, David Marsh, the man who billed at $450 an hour, and specialized in finding ways around things that were supposed to be immovable. The phone rang twice. Dominic. David's voice came through the speaker, carrying a weight Dominic hadn't heard in it before. Not alarm exactly. More like a man who has been holding news he didn't want to deliver and has just run out of time not to. Please tell me you haven't gone to the property yet. I'm here, Dominic said. A short silence. Did she mention the Reeves group? David asked. Dominic's eyes moved to Vivian. Her expression did not change. What about the Reeves group? Dominic said carefully. David exhaled. Reeves Group is a land and renewables acquisitions company out of Atlanta. They specialize in purchasing agricultural parcels with existing renewable infrastructure and long-term offtake agreements. Another pause. They've been in contact with Vivian's attorney at Osei and Carver since March. Their initial offer on the sunflower parcel was $3.1 million, she countered. He stopped. Dominic, she countered at 4.2, and they came back this morning. Dominic stood very still in front of the back window. They came back at what? He said. $4 million, plus a 10% equity stake in the Reeves Agricultural REIT, which is scheduled to go public on the NYSE in Q2 next year. David sounded like he was reading from a document he wished he'd never seen. Her attorney confirmed acceptance of the terms this morning at 9:45. The formal purchase agreement goes to signature Thursday. Tiffany was watching Dominic's face. She had seen that face do many things: confidence, charm, controlled anger, the particular performance of magnanimity that he used in negotiations. She had not seen it do this. This was something else. This was what happened when the architecture of a person's self-image gets hit with information it wasn't built to withstand. She's not selling to me, Dominic said, to no one in particular. She was never going to sell to me. No, David said. I don't think she was. Dominic ended the call. He stood at the window for another moment, looking at the solar panels catching the 4 o'clock sun. You've already sold it, he said. Not an accusation. Just a man finding the shape of a thing that had already happened. I've agreed to terms, Vivian said from the table. The sale closes in 60 days. The house isn't included in the sale, for what it's worth. I'm keeping the house and the surrounding 2 acres. The Reeves Group only wants the income-generating acreage. Tiffany stood up slowly. Her wedge sandals connected with the heart pine floor with a sound that seemed louder than it should have. So all of this, she said, looking around the room, at the walnut table and the geological maps in their frames, and the cognac sofa and the general air of a life that had been very deliberately made. You didn't need him to come here. You didn't need to sign anything. You could have just had my attorney decline, Vivian said. Yes, I could have. Then why did you let us come? Tiffany asked. And there was something genuine in the question, something stripped of the performance she'd walked in wearing. She actually wanted to know. Vivian looked at her for a moment. Because I wanted Dominic to see it, she said simply. Not to hurt him. I want to be clear about that. She looked at Dominic then, and her voice carried no heat, only the particular certainty of someone who had had 3 years to decide what she thought. I wanted you to walk through the door of something you threw away and understand what you were looking at. I wanted you to do the math yourself. Why? Dominic asked. His voice had come down from its manufactured registers. It was just a voice now. A man's voice. Because you came here to show me what you thought I was, Vivian said. You brought a $10 bottle of wine and a check for $200,000 and a 25-year-old who doesn't know what Loro Piana is, and you knocked on my door expecting to find a woman who was grateful for the rescue. She stood up from the table. She was not a tall woman, but she stood the way people stand who have stopped performing their own smallness. I needed you to understand that the rescue never happened. I didn't need rescuing. I needed 40 acres in 3 years. Chapter 5. After the rover left, Dominic Hale did not say much after that. There wasn't, in the end, very much left to say. He picked up the quitclaim deed from the walnut table and put it back in the manila folder with the unhurried movements of a man who has discovered that an action he prepared for is no longer available to him. He looked at the certified check for $200,000 for a long moment. He picked it up, looked at Vivian, and for one flickering second she thought he might leave it anyway, the way you leave flowers at a grave. He put it back in the folder. The gas station rosé he left on the table. Tiffany walked out first, navigating the porch steps with more care than she'd come up them. She got into the Range Rover and did not slam the door. Dominic paused at the base of the porch steps and looked back at Vivian. who stood in the doorway watching him the way she'd watched him arrive, with the calm of someone who had already run the numbers. "You could have told me," he said, "when we were married, what you saw in this land." "I know," Vivian said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about it for a moment. "Because you would have developed it," she said. He had no answer for that. He got into the Range Rover. The engine turned over with the quiet, expensive sound of a vehicle that cost more than the house it was parked in front of, or used to, before Vivian got to work. The tires crackled over the gravel, and the pearl-white SUV moved back down the tunnel of old pecan trees and disappeared onto the county road. The silence that came after was total and familiar. Vivian stood on the porch for a while, listening to it. Then she went inside. She walked through the restored entry hall, past the framed geological maps, into the kitchen at the back of the house. The kitchen was the room she'd spent the most time getting right. Salvaged soapstone countertops in a deep charcoal gray, open shelving and reclaimed hard pine that matched the floors. A farmhouse sink that she'd found in an estate sale outside Greenwood and had re-enameled herself over the course of a February weekend. She filled the kettle and set it on the commercial burner, a Blue Star 6-burner range in matte black, the one luxury she had permitted herself without apology in the first year. She reached for her phone. There was a text from Renata Osei, sent 41 minutes ago. "Reeves confirmed final execution of the purchase agreement. Wire for escrow deposit hits tomorrow." You should know they're already referring to this parcel internally as the Hale acquisition. I told their paralegal you'd probably want to rename it. "Call me when Dominic leaves." Vivian smiled at the phone. She typed back, "He just left. Rename it whatever I want." Renata replied in under a minute. "It's your land, Vivian. Has been from the beginning." The kettle began to build toward a boil. Vivian set the phone face down on the soapstone counter and looked out the kitchen window at the back acreage, the hemp rows casting long late-afternoon shadows eastward across the red-brown soil. The solar panels holding their angle against the dropping sun with the patient, functional beauty of something built to last. She had sat at that window a lot over the past 3 years. On the cold February mornings when the pipes had needed wrapping and the furnace had gone out and she was living on contractor coffee and her own stubbornness. On the evenings after the co-op inspector had walked the solar installation and signed off on the interconnection agreement. On the afternoon her attorney had called to say that the Reeves Group had made initial contact, and Vivian had listened to the number they were proposing and then very calmly asked Renata to tell them she'd need some time to consider. She had not needed time to consider. She had not needed time to consider. She had known her answer before Renata finished the sentence, but she had needed Dominic to run out of patience first. She had needed him to get in his Range Rover and drive 3 hours into the Delta to deliver a check that was worth less than 4 months of her power purchase agreement payments. She had needed him to walk through the door. The kettle whistled. Vivian poured the water over the tea and let it steep. She picked it up, carried it to the back door, and stepped out onto the rear porch that she'd rebuilt herself. Board by board the summer before last, the wood pressure-treated and painted a deep charcoal gray to match the soapstone inside. The last of the afternoon's sun lay flat and golden across the fields. A red-tailed hawk was working the thermals above the south acreage in slow, banking circles, watching the rows below with the calm attention of something that knows exactly what it's looking for and is prepared to wait. Vivian watched it for a while. 3 years ago, she had signed a piece of paper in a mediation room in Memphis and walked out into the August heat with the deed to 40 acres of land that 3 attorneys, 1 land assessor, and her own ex-husband had dismissed as barely worth the paper it was printed on. She had driven south with a single carload of things and a plan that was not fully formed yet. More like a known direction, a heading. The way a soil survey tells you what the ground is capable of before anyone has put a seed in it. She had not been broken. She had not been abandoned. She had been released, and she had used the release precisely. Dominic had wanted to see her diminished. He had wanted the evidence. The peeling paint, the cracked steps, the gas station wine sitting unchallenged on the table. To confirm what he already believed, that she had needed him to be what she was, that without his momentum, his contacts, his deal flow, and his Range Rover and his polished industry relationships, she would have slowly subsided into ordinariness. Instead, she had taken 40 acres of Mississippi flatland and turned it into the most intelligent land investment in Sunflower County in a decade. She had done it using exactly the knowledge and discipline he had spent 8 years treating as a conversational liability. She had been methodical. She had been patient. She had read the soil the way she read everything, not for what it appeared to be, but for what it was actually capable of. She sipped her tea. The hawk found what it was looking for and dropped in a single clean line toward the south field. $4 million and a REIT stake in a company going public in Q2. Not because she needed the money to be vindicated, but because the number, when it arrived in Dominic Hale's ears from his own attorney's voice, in his own ex-wife's kitchen, on land he had handed over like a consolation prize, that number was the most precise and accurate translation she had ever made. It said everything her silence had been saying for 3 years, finally rendered in a language he could not misread. Vivian set her mug on the porch railing and looked out at the last of the light on the fields. Somewhere beyond the pecan trees, a county road ran back toward the highway, and on that highway a pearl-white Range Rover was moving north toward Memphis, carrying a man and a woman who had come down here to watch something end and were driving back with the particular silence of people who've witnessed something they hadn't planned for. She didn't think about that for long. There was too much else to look at.